Ladies and gentlemen.
Alright, we're starting off with a Gamakatsu BS10 Stinger, size 4. This is going to be a flood tide crab. So we just wrap on our thread here, and I'm using 210 denier, and it's a special thread. It covers well, and it's easy to work with and tie. So we'll just cut our tag end off here at the end, and then we're going to put our tail in. I'm going to do a flat mini marabou 3-feather tail. I'm going to tie it in flat. It will help with the fall of the fly. This is going in the very end. I'm going to wind this down and kind of tie it at an angle so that when it hits the bottom, the tail kind of moves around in the water while the fish is, we're waiting on the fish to come see what's going on with it. We'll just cut the excess off. Trash can, right back to the trash can. And we'll just kind of cover this up right here. We're going to cover it in just a minute with everything else, so I'm not going to be too particular about that. Then I'm going to run it up to about 1/8 of an inch behind the hook. And I'm using the Hairline Dubbing Brass Eyes medium in a black color. This seems to be an ideal fly eye for just about anything in lieu of using lead. I'm just going to tie that in, just doing some figure 8 wraps, 5 wraps on a side, and then I'm going to do some under wraps, kind of tighten it up, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to give it about 3 turns each on the eye, and that'll lock it into where we need. I'm going to look at it, make sure, because it's all going to get glued later anyway. I'm going to run the thread back to the back of the fly. I'm going to flip the fly over. I didn't get the eyes out yet. Do that. I'm just going to use some simple bead eyes, glass bead eyes. I'm going to choose this color because it pops on this fly pretty much. Everybody seems to like this eye on there. I've got several I use, from a natural to a clear. But this pink, I don't know if you can see that, if you will, a little bit. The pink eye shows up. It's got a blue hollow center in it. You just cut them off here as I tie them in on a V. And then we're just going to lay them in on each side of the hook. Back to about 1/4 of an inch. And what I do is I just bend it out a little bit, grab the feathers, and then I wrap behind it to let it stand off just a little bit. If you grab a little bit of your marabou, don't worry about it. It's not going to be the end of the world. You just want those eyes to show up. Flip it over, and I'm going to tie the other one in, and then I'll look at them to make sure I got them even. There's a pretty quick tie on this fly. Just a couple of wraps back there. You can always change that if you want to in a little bit. Looks pretty good. Okay, very good. Now we're going to put in a little small collar before we start our body. In that collar, we're going to put in some Glisten Gloss fibers, Estas Grande, just as a little hot spot on the back. It's got a little tiny bit of glare in it, or glitter I should say. I'm going to tie this back, and then we'll get it in there solid. It slipped out, my fault. I'm going to tie it down kind of tight and wrap it back only twice, because you don't want to give it too much bulk. And then you just tie off your Estas Grande and run your thread back, because you're going to make your first body attachment there. Get that out of the way. Alright, now as we start our body, we're just using EP fiber, purple and black. Pretty good combination for flood tide. You start off with a purple. You tie it down on X wraps. Twist my thread like that because it helps it to lay back, and then we're going to bring it up on this side, and then we're going to pull this side back, and it just causes it to lay in there flat like that. We'll trim the excess later. Alright, at this point we're going to cut it a little bit long because we're going to make it a small bodied fly, but we're going to also put in our first set of legs here. I like these legs. They're Loco legs, ultraviolet or UV in a violet color. I really like this because it gives it a small blue flash. I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but as they move it back and forth, you can see the blue pop out in it, and it really stands out in the water. You don't need a whole lot of flash on these flies because you're throwing them in close proximity to the fish, and you're just letting it fall to the bottom and then stripping it mildly. I'll break off 2 of those. And what I do on these is I cut them in half before I put them on, usually, if I'm speed tying. We're not doing that today. I want to show you a little trick with a tool that I have to hold the legs back. And what I'll do is I'll take one single leg and I'll wrap it on my thread, equal parts, and then I'll tie it up against the body. Make sure it's tied well. Capture it, and then this little tool here is a common paper clip, like an office for several things. I just take and put that leg behind that, and it holds it in place. Then I'll flip it over, and I'll do the same thing with the other leg on the other side. I'll pull this up, get it even, capture it, tie it in good. And again, we're trying to avoid a whole lot of bulk here, so this is all going to be glued when we're done. And I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll fold that under like that so it holds it out of the way. Now you can start your body. The next color is black. We'll tie in black. Just a point, most tiers will tie on the non-barbed side of the hook. They'll tie their ribs, or they'll have a rib on the top of the body. I don't know that it makes that much difference, but I look at it. Fish probably hit it out of instinct, but I think it looks better to me. That's the only reason I do that. Many other tiers don't do that. They don't bother with it, but I just like it myself. Okay. We got our first black color in. We'll put another purple in, then we'll tie in our second set of legs. Again, we'll wrap over with a X wraps, pull it back, tuck it in. A little extra thing, if you're tying and your material come forward, just take and wiggle it back like that and hold it, and then put 2 locking wraps or 3 locking wraps in front of that. It'll hold it right in place. And you cut that off. Now we're going to put our second set of legs in. We're going to do it the same way. commercial tying, I do this a lot faster. I'm just taking my time today and doing it kind of slow, but I got everything laid out. That's the key if you're going to do commercial tying, is lay it out in advance so that you got it all kind of stationed there, ready to grab and go. Because commercial tying is the same thing over and over. It slipped out. And it can be monotonous unless you put on some good music, which I do like. Okay. We got that locked down. We're going to put that up underneath there. We're going to redo these. These just slipped out. Okay. Alright, now you got your second set of legs in there and your materials there. We're going to finish on out. We're going to tie in another black up front. And don't ask me why this black and purple pattern works, but on flood tide up here in North Florida, they use those colors quite a bit. I do this in what I call a bottom dweller, which is another very effective redfish fly. It's similar to most everybody's. There's no new patterns out there. You just take patterns and develop them into your own style. So nobody really, except the originals like Jack Gartside on the Gurgler, nobody can lay claim to too much individual stuff that's new, with the exception of a few magnificent tiers, which I am not, in this world, that really have a thinking process that's above mine. But anyway, we're glad they do it because it helps us to develop and augment patterns to use them ourselves. I'll just kind of pull that out a little bit and straighten it out, and then I'll leave right here. I'll run over and I'll put 1-2 wraps there. Reason is, when I move it back and forth to cut it before I put the weed guard on, that doesn't allow that to grab that material and wrap it under, so you get cross wraps on that. So that's the reason I do that, and it's technical. I just have decided it's better to do it that way than get your stuff all mangled up. Now what I do at this point is I roll it over, check my legs, make sure they're pulled to the side so they're going to lay right, and then I'll just run a bead of super glue up the rib of that from the tail to cement those eyes in, just up to the eye. I won't go in the front. And that basically just helps it to stabilize a little bit so that when you're trimming it, you don't, and your scissors lock up in the material, it doesn't pull it out of the loops. Right now it's glued, and it's going to be better than that in just a few minutes. Alright, now another reason why it's important to keep those legs back is cutting and trimming this fly. Because if you don't, you might cut a leg off and have to start all over again. Ask me how I know that. That's experience. And then I'm using the scissors of choice for me is Dr. Slick and the extra curved short scissors. I really like these because they're going to cut the angles that I need on this fly. And again, this is going to be a small fly. It looks like there's a lot of material there, but I like the smaller profiles, especially for flood tide, because the fish sometimes will turn up their nose at larger flies. Most of these little grass or mud crabs that are in North Florida and fiddlers are all smaller, so I like the smaller profile. Some guys pull all their material up and then cut them both at the same time. I don't like to do that because I always wind up cutting it too big. Now I'll give you another little hint here while we're cutting this material up. I used to tie these in a little round body like a dime. I found that if you strip the fly too fast, it will have a tendency to roll in the water. And sometimes if it looks like a crab escaping, crabs don't roll over like that. So somebody gave me an important tip. Let's make it more arrowhead shaped. So I try to inculcate that into my tying patterns as well. Still small, but it's got more of an arrowhead shape instead of like the round dime shape. All right, I'm going to pull this over. even all this up, see where we are with that. I don't know why it's slipping out today. It hasn't been doing that. That looks pretty good right there. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. Now, we're going to tie on the weed guard before we pull the legs loose. And I use Mason's hard mono, especially in the grass. I use either 16 or 20. I had someone ask me for 80 pound. I didn't think that was practical, but they wanted 80 pounds, so I put a single weed guard on there at 80 pound. I haven't heard from them since, so it must have not worked so good. But anyway, that's just my judgment. I tie custom flies, so colors, size weed guards, hooks, anything you want, let me know, and I'll tie them exactly like you want them. And as far as I know, I have 100% customer satisfaction. I think either that or they didn't even want to call me back. One of the two. But anyways, you know, I do this for fun, and mostly what I do is I sell them to buy new materials with, or other materials. Then I grab it and I keep these handy dandy little close cutters, nail cutters, in there to clip that off. I like a V shape on the grass. Singles don't seem to do it for me. I wind up getting them hung up anyway. And that grass, the Spartina grass, is tough when you fish the backcountry. Okay, we've got our weed guard tied in now, and I'll wrap it a couple of times, and I'm going to use my whip finisher. And I'm just going to put a whip finish behind the weed guard. It keeps it from collapsing, and it strengthens it just a little bit. And I'm going to do one right in the front as well. And we're basically done. We've trimmed it. We just have to trim the legs. Another little note, when I was putting them in a shop, I left the legs full length, and that's kind of a customer preference. Some like them long. I tied some for the owner, and he wanted fluorescent legs on them, and they stuck out about that far. He says I can see them that way, so I left them long. And I thought, well, that's a good idea, because not everybody wants short legs on their crabs unless the shop requests it. And you can see when I lay this down on the table, you'll be able to see just how long these legs are. Alright, very good. Just want to check the body one more time. I got a few long hairs right here I missed. This one I call the MFTC. It's a mini flood-tide crab in black and purple. You can see the long legs. Kind of see those shimmer against the black there as well. Anyways, that's a very popular one in North Florida here. Some guides use it, shops use it. You can cut those legs off short if you want to. The main thing is the mini marabou works. This gives it a little glisten gloss here, and the legs really flash. So I found that subtle little features work. I can tie them anyway. I can tie them with regular marabou. I can tie them with fox. I can tie them with raccoon. I can tie them with anything, but this just seems to be the one that's popular in the shop.